Welcome to Midlife Mix.
Am I your first Canadian podcast?
Oh my God. And they say you always remember your first.
Both things can be true. He's cheating on you. He's busting up your barbershop. Welcome, James Sexton, to Midlife Mix. James, am I your first Canadian podcast?
Oh my gosh, maybe. I mean, they say you always remember your first. So yeah, I think so. I don't know what that's about, but yeah, that was my little Canada joke there. My little, some of my favorite things are Canadian. The Kids in the Hall, South Park. Well, actually, that's probably most of the list. Jordan Peterson. So there's a lot of things I like that are Canadian. So we're gonna add you to the list now.
Amazing. Well, you're my first guest on Midlife Mix, so you're my first too.
Okay, cool. There you go. So then you'll remember me for sure.
I will always remember you.
I love it.
All right. In addition to being one of New York City's best well-known divorce lawyers, you are also the author of 2 books, How to Stay in Love, and If You're in My Office, It's Already Too Late. And when you're not in the courtroom or in the writing room, you're appearing on TV shows and podcasts. You're also a dad of 2, and you're heavily involved in jiu-jitsu, yeah?
Yeah. When you say it all out loud like that, I listen, I go like, boy, that sounds exhausting. That guy really needs to take a little time off. Yeah, no, that's a pretty solid description of the resume there. I also like to cook. That's the other thing I do. So when you throw that in the mix, yeah, that's you pretty much run down everything I do.
So how do the skills you use to win a match in jiu-jitsu compare to or are parallel to the skills you need to win in the courtroom?
They're actually exactly the same. It really is about, because all jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, is really just chess using your body instead of pieces. And the pieces are essentially the moves. And everyone, at a certain level of skill, everyone knows the same moves, right? So it's just a question of doing the right moves in the right order. Well, it's the same thing with the law. The law, like you go to law school, you learn the rules. And then you get out of law school and you kind of don't know how to do anything, but you know where to look everything up. So ultimately, what it comes down to is, when you get out of law school, you're like the equivalent of a purple belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You know a lot of moves, but you don't know how to put them together in any particular way, and you don't have any technique, and you don't really have the ability yet to make someone on the other side do things. Like you have a way to so what happens in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, for example, is you learn, okay, if the guy goes to grab my wrist, I know where his arm's going to be, and then I can do the move I want to do. So I got to figure out a way I can make him grab my wrist. So you'll sometimes dangle your wrist out in the hopes that he'll take the bait, like a fish taking the bait. And then you go, okay, now I've got his sleeve, and you pull him. So it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu as in the courtroom. In the courtroom, I try to set up the other side in the same ways. I try to use feints. I try to use, tactical thinking and strategy to get the other side to do things that will be advantageous and create openings and attacks for me, while also, just like in chess, just like in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, simultaneously attacking and defending.
Good. Okay, so we're here today to talk about marriage and divorce midlife, but let's start with marriage. Listen, What does love have to do with it anymore? Like, in your experience dealing with couples in midlife, are they staying together because they are still in love after decades? Or do you see more they're staying out of obligation, out of routine, kids, finances?
Yeah. So, I have to say as a disclaimer that I see people who are in a particular circumstance. That's why the name of my first book was If You're in My Office, It's Already Too Late, A Divorce Lawyer's Guide to Staying Together, because the idea is if going to see a divorce lawyer is anything other than a fleeting thought in your mind that you just have for a second when your spouse does something really stupid, if you're actually made an appointment, put the money down for a consult fee, and are sitting across from me, things are far along. Things are far along at that point. And there's a lot of, my sister's a dentist, and she always says to me, people come to her when they have a toothache. And she said, by the time you have a toothache, there's a very limited number of things she can do. But if you came to her before you had a toothache, there's a lot of things she can do to prevent you from ever having a toothache. So it's the same thing for me. By the time you're in my office, you're so far apart. So I see a very self-selecting sample. So if you say to me, people in midlife who are married and they're sort of, in a marriage, do you see that people are happy or unhappy? That's like asking an oncologist, do you see a lot of people with cancer? It's like, oh, like if an oncologist didn't, whoever discovered water, it wasn't a fish. When you're in a thing, you sometimes don't see it. So like if you ask an oncologist, they're gonna be like, oh my God, everybody I met today has cancer. And it's like, right, because you're an oncologist. If you were a cab driver, most of the people you'd meet that day wouldn't have cancer. So I happen to meet a lot of people who are at midlife or various points of midlife or approaching midlife or sort of in late midlife. And yeah, their marriage is fragile or their marriage is broken at that point. And it's very easy to ask those people, hey, how did you get here? But facts all come with points of view. And what I'm going to hear is their version of how they got there. So I'm going to hear, oh, my husband's sleeping with his secretary. And that sounds like a pretty good explanation for why someone might be getting divorced. But if you dig a little deeper, you go, well, we also weren't sleeping together for the last 3 years. And okay, well then I'm not saying that excuses his behavior, but you can't claim, oh yeah, I thought we were blissfully happily married and I was so stunned that he slept with someone because you weren't sleeping together for the last 3 years. So I think that midlife is definitely an opportunity for people, and men and women really do tend to sort of look at themselves and sort of reinvent themselves at best, or at least start thinking about the fragility of life and health. Often people's parents are aging and they make that transition from being a child of a parent to almost a quasi-parental role to one's parent. I know I deal with that a lot. My father is no longer the guy who I call to solve problems or help me solve problems. He's the guy I call and check on. Is he okay? And, I'm more parentified when it comes to him. So when that shift starts to happen and we see ourselves at this, particular waypoint in the journey of a human being, I think it's natural to ask questions about this most foundational relationship that you have with another person in the form of your spouse. And very often that's a choice you made when you were in late adolescence, or very, early 20s, mid 20s. The average number in the United States is still around 26 years old, which, there was a time when I definitely thought I was an adult when I was 26 years old. But now that I have a 27-year-old and a 25-year-old, I look at both of them and go, how in God's name were they allowed to vote? So I think it's a time that's prone to ideally introspection, but that introspection sometimes leads people to painful conclusions or conclusions that make them have to question other parts of their life.
I think marriage when you're younger, marriage changes, as we know, from when we're younger to when we're older. And I think when we're younger, you start to have kids and there's real benefits to being married, right? 2 incomes, there's somebody there to help with the kids. But when you're talking about midlife, who do you think benefits more from midlife marriage, men or women?
Boy, that's a great question. So I guess I always, because of the nature of being a divorce lawyer, I always look at rights and obligations. So when I think about parenting has certain rights and it has certain obligations, right? So you get certain benefits, you have certain responsibilities. And so I always try to look at that as the balancing test of those things. So, if you're the primary physical custodial parent of children, well, you get to make some important decisions, but you're also the one that tells them to brush their teeth and eat their broccoli. And the other parent, they have less time with them, but the time they have is like fun time. So you kind of say, well, I don't actually know which of those in terms of a cost-benefit analysis is better. So I would say for men and women, men certainly, there's a saying, I didn't make it up, so don't get mad at me, that men age like wine and women age like avocados. And it's meant from a place of dating life, that a man in his 40s and 50s and even 60s, if he's moderately successful, ideally has, some of his hair, he can attract women in their 20s and 30s quite easily who would actually be interested in a relationship with him, not just sort of a physical relationship. If anything, they'd be more interested in an ongoing relationship because he hopefully has more economic security, stability, things like that. Women, generally don't have those same, options necessarily, or at least the volume of them. Certainly they have, the opportunity for purely physical interactions with younger guys. But the truth is, they have a different pool of dating. So I think it's a question of what do we define as benefit? What do we define as a happy life? If your definition of a happy life is how many romantic partners you can potentially get to interest you, then I think there's an imbalance. If you define a happy life as the ability to, feel deeply connected to aspects of the self and aspects of your family unit and extended family unit in a way that feels fulfilling, I think a lot of men in midlife reach a point where they say, how much of the last 20 years of my life has been for me? A lot of it has been for making sure that my spouse has what they need, making sure my children have what they need. By the way, women, of course, have that same experience of like, hey, how much have I given to my children? How much have I given to my spouse? And when do I land in that order? When do I land in that pecking order? And just asking that question, in my experience, especially in the last few years, has really incurred the wrath of the zeitgeist, where if you say like, hey, I might have a right to be happy. It's like, ooh, narcissistic abuser, narcissist, because that's become like narcissist and gaslight is like on your 2024 bingo card. Everybody's got that one. So I think, there's selfishness, right? And there's narcissism, but there's also self-interest. And I think midlife is a time in both men and women when they start thinking about self-interest. Hey, where do I land? Like, my children are growing. My children are going to soon be living their lives as adults. And where do I fit in now? What's my value? Like, what's my purpose? And I think that's, again, a question that it confronts both genders. It confronts people at every socioeconomic level and in every socioeconomic permutation. Like if you're asking me from a place of a traditional 1950s, wife is at home, not working, taking care of the children, intending, meeting him with a snifter of brandy at the door, and hubby puts on his, his fedora and goes into the city and then comes home and, oh, what's for dinner, darling? Like, I don't think that's real anymore, really. I don't think that's in any culture anymore. I don't think that's really what happens. I think, most families, you have two working people. You have some different divisions of labor than used to be. So in that socioeconomic permutation, I think everyone is losing and gaining something. So it's really hard to game out exactly what the average would be.
Yeah, I think you said it, right? Like times have changed. This is a time in our life when we are getting to know ourselves again. At least that's how I feel. Yeah. So I think, I don't know, some people might say that women need men less as they reach midlife. What do you make of that?
I think so. I mean, especially when they have some modicum of economic security or they don't feel that the benefit of either dual income or having the opposite sex as a primary wage earner is all that important. Like, I think people do reach a point, ideally, as early as possible, but certainly by midlife, I think people start to realize the limitations of money. They realize that there are problems that can't be solved by money. Your parent getting sick, you having health issues. Money can't solve that. Money can make certain things easier, but it can't solve those problems. My former mentor from NYU, Dr. Neil Postman, used to say that, money offers real solutions to imaginary problems and imaginary solutions to real problems. And so I think in midlife, we start to confront a lot of limitations. We start to confront the limitations of defining yourself as a parent. We confront the limitations of our own physical health, right? Like until I was in my 40s, I didn't know what it meant to have a sore back. I didn't know what it meant. Like, I had no idea. Like, if I got injured, there was usually a cool story involved. It wasn't like, oh, I got out of bed weird, or like the dogs took up too much of the bed and I kind of tilted and then I woke up and everything hurts. So these are the things we start to confront the limitations of. And money is one of the things we confront the limitations of. So again, the answer to, in my view, of do women need men or even do men need women, it really depends on, well, what kind of life do you want to have? It certainly, at that point, a person has probably fulfilled the biological imperative. If they're going to have kids, they've had kids, or they've made the decision that, a child-free life is the life that they want to lead. So do they need the opposite sex to be able to reproduce with? No. They need someone for companionship. They need, ideally someone to sort of be there to know them and see their blind spots. But that doesn't even necessarily require a romantic connection. And by the way, one of the fundamental critiques I have of marriage is the amount of pressure it puts on people to have one person who checks every single box of their life. So best friend, best roommate, best lover, best travel companion, best parent, best pet co-parent, best, that's a lot. If you can find one person that's the best in all those categories, that's amazing. But would you do that in any other aspect of your life? Would you be like, oh, that butcher is really good, but he doesn't have good seafood, and he also isn't a good dancer? Like, well, okay, I don't need that from my butcher or a baker. Yeah, he's a good baker, but he's really not good at giving relationship advice. It's like, I don't need that from my baker. So looking to midlife, I think people have started to figure out, like, okay, I'm getting this from this well, I'm getting this from this well. And I think that realization sometimes for people makes them realize that, oh, maybe this idea that there's this one Prince Charming or perfect princess who's going to come into my life and satisfy perfectly all of my needs. You've seen your friends, all the weddings you were in, half of those people are divorced. All of the baby showers you went to, the kids are growing, and you start to sort of look at life in a different way and those roles in a different way.
I think as we get to midlife, I think where women might have, I don't want to say an advantage over men, but I feel like women are better at fostering their relationships with other women. They have best friends that they have these in-depth conversations with who sort of maybe fulfill that need that maybe they're not getting at home with their husband who they've lived with for 20, 30 years. I'm not sure that the same can be said for men. That's why
I would go so far as to say it absolutely is not true for men. I think if you went to a room full of women, even young women, I think if you went into a high school class with an equal amount of men and young women and said, how many people in here have had a really bad day, and you call your best friend and you just talk to them and maybe you cry and you just tell them about the day you had and they just are there and they comfort you. I think almost every female hand in there would go up and no male hands would go up. Because it's just not the manner in which young men are raised to be, and therefore they grow into men that don't have that kind of bond with their male friends, that you just call each other and just, share how you're feeling in that way. It's something that, I know I certainly admire that in observing the female relationships in my life, the way that women are sort of permitted to interact with each other, for you to even... I every once in a while, I'll watch the women in my life interacting and, they're, oh my God, you look so cute. Oh my God, I love it. Oh, your hair, I love it so much. And I think to myself, if I said to my male friends, oh my God, you look so cute. Look at your hair. You look so good. It's just so not, it would be instantly Jim, something you want to tell me about, you're making some real life changes, So I think that is a very real thing. And I think that creates a vacancy, a hole in men's lives, again, that they often fill in really stupid ways. They fill it with a mistress. They fill it with, those very cliched midlife activities of I'm going to buy a motorcycle. I'm going to, go out and do these outrageous, try to be and do things that are much younger than they need to be, as opposed to taking the connections I have, sharing the emotional experience I'm having, find commonality in my experience with that of people that I love and trust and who knew me when I was young and who helped me remember that the fundamental parts of me that they love are still there and will never age out, So, yeah, I think women, I've always admired the relationship options women have with each other far greater than the way that men relationships are most of the time.
Yeah. So I think in every relationship, there's a difference between loving somebody and liking somebody. And do you think it's possible for couples who have reached midlife who has spent decades together. And yeah, they still love one another, but maybe they don't necessarily like one another anymore. And if so, how does that affect the marriage? Or does it even stand a chance of survival if that's the case?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, love is a feeling and love is a verb. To love someone is often to love them, to act with love toward them. And to love someone is also a feeling, and when you said that, like, you can love someone and not like them, I thought of my 25-year-old son who, I love very, very much. But there are times where I say to him, I'm like, I love you very much, but like, I don't really like you right now. Like, I don't really like how you're interacting with the universe. I don't really like the choices you're making in your life. And there is absolutely no doubt how much I love him. But there is, in this chapter, in this moment, a feeling of like, man, I don't get you right now, and you don't get me right now, but we love each other. Like, we have this bond of affection. We have this tie, right? We have this history. We have these family ties between us that are very strong and powerful. We have a certain connectivity and interdependence. So, whether that's something simple like you're on my cell phone plan, or whether it's something like, listen, like we have these regular interactions with each other in the context of a larger family. So I think that is a very real thing. What impact does it have on a marriage? I think if you love someone, that's a really great thing, both as a verb and a feeling. But I think if you don't like them often enough, you probably end up in my office. Steve Jobs once was talking about why he didn't ever retire. And he said that he liked what he did. Like, he used the word, I liked what I did. But if there were ever enough days in a row where he didn't like it, he was going to stop. But it wasn't like, oh, if I ever don't like it, because you're going to have times you don't like it. Like, you're going to have time. Like, you can't be in a relationship with someone, a romantic relationship, any kind of close relationship, even a parent-child relationship, a sibling relationship. The only people that you never dislike are people that you don't know very well, which is why affairs are so intoxicating, because you're only just getting the greatest hits of a person. You don't have to deal with the day-to-day of them. You're kind of restricted from the day-to-day of them. So I think, being married to someone, you're going to have moments where, you just don't particularly like them. You don't like what they're doing. I see it a lot right now post-election in the United States. There's a lot of people that, there were a lot of people divided often on gender lines, where like the husband was a Trump person and the wife was a Harris person. And I think there were some unique reasons for Democrats or for women to be aligned with the reproductive rights and things like that came along with the Harris campaign. And I think, it created some moments where people did not like their spouse. But is that transient, situation-specific feeling sufficient to say, okay, so I'm gonna fundamentally change the nature of our coupling now? I don't know. I don't know that is that strong of an impetus. But I think if it lasts long enough, and if it has second order effects where, okay, now this person has changed the way they relate to a lot of other things in their life, then it starts to make sense to me.
So what we're hearing a lot about these days, whether it's a trend or it's just trendy now, is the concept of gray divorce. So this is defined as couples who are choosing to split up after age 50. Studies are showing that this is happening at a quicker rate. I think the quickest rate as it has been, and it gets even quicker as couples reach their 60s and older. So why is this happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of that is a shift in the demographics in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s of when people had children. Because there was a time where people got married younger, they had children younger, and therefore the kids went off to college while they were still younger. So they were in their 40s when their kids went off to college. The shift in when people got married, that started in the 90s. In terms of getting later and later, almost every year a little bit later. And when people choose to have children after the date they marry, also is slowly getting further and further along, which the second order effect of that is when your children go off to college. The most common time for people to file for divorce is after their children have finished high school and are going off to university, because people try to keep it together for the kids. That is a very common and understandable thing where people think, okay, we want to try to keep it together as best we can until the children are somewhat independent and are moving on to the next chapter of their life that doesn't involve living with their mother and their father in the same home. So, I certainly think that is something that is a factor in why we're seeing a rise in gray divorce. I also think that age is changing. The manner in which we perceive, I remember growing up being told like 40 is the new 30. And then it was like, well, 50 is the new 40 or 50 is the new 30. And now it's like 60 is the new 40. And what all of those little cliches or axioms are saying is that, 60 is not as old as it used to be. Because there have been such advancements in medicine and in healthcare and in, I will say, what I'll call wellness, right? Like lifelong wellness. So people who observe good habits in the 40s and the 50s, their 60s and 70s are going to be very different than someone who abuses their body and doesn't have, any exercise knowledge or any nutrition, which again, there's a proliferation now of high quality food available to people. Exercise is much more, in the 1970s, if you said I'm going to the gym, people would be like, what are you talking about? Whereas now, if you go, I'm going to the gym, like that's a very normal thing for a person to do, or to say, oh, I've got my Fitbit on, or I've got my little Apple Watch on, or whatever it might be. That's a normal thing. All of that has these second order effects on how we perceive where we stand in the timeline of life. And I think when your children are moving on to the next chapter, and therefore you are no longer defining yourself primarily as I'm a dad. I remember distinctly the feeling that like 99% of my time was consumed with taking care of my children in some fashion, whether it was working so they could have what they need or actually hands-on taking care of my children. It was a huge part of my life. And I remember constantly being distracted by, all right, when is Noah out of school? When is Billy out of school? Okay, where are they again? And what are they doing today? And I should text them, or they haven't checked in yet. What's going on? When that focus goes away, and suddenly it's like, oh, I'm actually still pretty vibrant. Like I'm not ready to sit on the front porch in a rocking chair and sort of, whittle, like that's where I think people again start to say, hey, wait a minute, there's another chapter. There's another chapter of my life here. And do I want it to be sedate? Do I want it to be action-packed? Does my partner? Because we've been together a long time now, and we may have grown like the tree that, it intertwines and you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Or it might be that we've grown in directions that make sense for us to take paths that diverge in this second half of our life.
I think too, when you are in the thick of it, when your kids are young, you are so, I don't want to say obsessed, but you're all about the kids, as you said, right? Like, what are they doing? Their schedules, you're just fighting to survive between work and kids and bills and all the rest. And when you're doing that and you're in the thick of that, you sometimes push down, all the issues. Okay, I'm not going to deal with this now because you just don't have time, or maybe you just don't have the energy. And then now that the kids are gone and it's just the two of you, and you're kind of looking at each other and be like, oh shit, we haven't dealt with this for the past 20 years, and now I have nowhere to turn, and we have to.
Right. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely correct. And I can relate to that feeling. And I know, when you're confronted with choices, any kinds of choices, suddenly there's this palette that like wasn't there. I remember the first time, my sons are 2 years apart, and I remember the first time neither of them was in a booster seat. And I remember getting in the car and like one got in, the other got in, and I thought, oh my God, this is so easy. Like, this is so easy. Like, it feels like a minute ago, I was like, do I have goldfish crackers? Do I have diapers? Do I have wipes? Okay, get this one strapped in and this one strapped in. And it was like, oh my God, going to the drugstore was like a whole production. And now it was like, oh yeah, just jump in and we're going. Like, we're just on the way. So that took 30 seconds to like just get going. And so it's like all of these little progressions where, for a little while, the question of, would I want to go out to dinner with my spouse? Would I want to sit across from them at a table and be like, so tell me about your day. Like, tell me what was going on. Like, think about your first dates and how you were interested and you were interesting, and like you find yourself like, okay, you don't have to ask the question, is this the person I'd pick? Because you're like, dude, I got to pick this one up at this time. This one has an ear infection. Like, we're not going out on a date because we're not going to get a sitter. And like, we have too much going on. So you don't have to ask the question of, if I had a sitter, if suddenly the children I knew were perfectly cared for this evening, is this the person I'd want to hang out with? And sometimes the answer is no. Because there'd be nothing to talk about with that person. Why? Because they're in the same prison you're in. They've just literally been doing nothing except like, taking care of this daycare center that is your home. So again, I don't fault people for that. But one of the things I talk about in my book is there's a lesson to be learned from divorced people, even for people who stay married. Because divorced people have this unique, interesting dynamic if they have a good co-parent who they get along with and who loves the kids and is a good parent as well. They've got this kind of best of both worlds thing going on where like when they have their kids and they're a full hands-on parent. And then when their kids go to the only other person who loves them as much as they do, they get to just be a grown-up with no kids for a couple of days. And I tell you, I have a lot of clients that will say like, yeah, it's not so bad. Like, it's pretty nice to have that time instead of saying, oh, I'm going to have that at some point. I'm going to have that in 15 years. Like, that feels really far away. When I had a 5-year-old, I remember thinking like, oh yeah, he's going to go off. Don't worry, I only got like 13 more years where I have to, have his socks everywhere. So I understand why people don't have that interaction with each other or ask those questions, because there's no occasion to, until you get to that place.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's too late, right? Once you get to that place, because you've sort of lost the communication throughout the years, which could lead to infidelity. So how is it linked to the midlife crisis, or is it?
Well, I mean, look, I think you actually just said it perfectly, which is there's disconnection. Like, disconnection is what leads to these things. So I rarely find that infidelity is the cause of a divorce. I rarely find that the things that most people point to as the cause, or what we would call in the law the proximate cause of the divorce, that it's really the proximate cause, the direct cause. What it really is no single raindrop's responsible for the flood. And yet the flood happens. So what it really is that these people are disconnecting. Like, they're disconnecting little bits. And in I think it was The Sun Also Rises, one of Steinbeck's characters has filed bankruptcy. And one of the other characters says to him, how did you go bankrupt? And he says, oh, I went bankrupt the same way everybody goes bankrupt. 2 ways, very slowly and then all at once. And I think that's how marriages fall apart, is very slowly and then all at once. It's like a little tiny disconnection, and then there's some avalanche that happens as a function of all those little disconnections. And so I think the way to tie it to midlife is that during this period of time where you have a very good reason to not be making your spouse a priority, right? Whether it's work, children, combination of the two, parents dealing with things, friends like, there are so many things that require your attention. I have to tell you, I'm 52 years old. I have people in their 30s working for me. I have people in their 40s working for me. I don't envy either of them. Like, I look at both of those decades of my life, and I think about how many plates I was trying to spin at once and how it all felt so important. And whatever I was doing, I felt like I was doing something else poorly. So when I was doing well at work, yeah, but I'm not home with the kids. And when I was home with the kids, I'm like, yeah, but I should be at work. And I always felt like I was failing somehow in some aspect of my life, And I think that feeling of like perpetually feeling like you're just missing the mark in some aspect of your life, it's paralyzing for people, And I think that period of time when you're trying to spin all of these incredibly important and worthy plates, it's pretty easy to go, all right, look, this person's married to me. They're not going anywhere, and we'll figure it out later. And you know what? When the kids are grown, we'll have time together. And like maybe this weekend we'll have a little time that we'll reconnect. Or look, we had sex on Tuesday last week, so that's fine. Like everybody's fine, because I think all of us, especially that have been parents, know there's like the feeling of, look, it's good enough. Like it's good enough. Like, all right, he ate enough, the kid. Like I got enough calories in him. He's not going to die today. Okay, the shoes are tied enough. Like, we just want to get by. And I think it's normal and natural for people to say, hey, this person's married to me spiritually, economically, legally. I don't have to worry so much about that. I can focus on all these other plates that are spinning and that are so hard to keep going. And maybe, oh my gosh, maybe I could have a minute to myself to go to a yoga class or to like sit and watch the football game or whatever it is that a human being certainly deserves, as a break in the battle in a minute where nothing's expected of them. So yeah, is it normal to just sort of go, all right, I'll deal with my spouse later. They're here, don't worry, they're here, they're not going anywhere. I got this ring, make sure they're here. But I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake. And I think we have to make a conscious practice. There's an old Zen Buddhist parable where a man goes to a Buddhist scholar and he says, I want to develop a meditation practice. Because I feel like, life is chaotic and I need to find the stability for meditation. And the teacher says, well, you're going to need to meditate for 30 minutes every day. And he says, well, then I don't have 30 minutes every day to meditate. He goes, oh, okay, then you're definitely going to need an hour every day. And I think that there's value in that idea that like you really, if you have no time to find connection with your spouse and to make the number one priority in that moment connection with your spouse, then you need to make that a priority. Because if you're in that place already, and it's an understandable place to be, I'm not saying you took a wrong turn. I don't want you to take a wrong turn that leads directly to my office. I want you to realize that you have every right and reason to have not made that time and made that priority, but it is a path that will lead you to peril. And it will actually then affect all of these other things in your life that you care so much about. So really taking the time, and again, I don't think it's a giant investment of time. One of the things I talk about in my book are very small ways that you can just remind your partner of connection. And they can be simple things like leaving a note for your partner when you're leaving for the day or whatever, or sending them a text message, just reminding them that you love them, that you find them handsome or beautiful, that you're grateful for the things that they do, that you see them and you see the things they do well. The whole world is constantly criticizing us, and even constructive criticism is still just criticism. So really trying to be your partner's cheerleader, even in those little small ways, I think that fosters connection that's really, really worthwhile.
What about technology? What role do you think it plays in the dissolution of a marriage? So, these days we not only have apps that make it easier to cheat, right?
Yes.
They'll hide your messages, they'll make them disappear.
Yes.
There's a calculator that's not a calculator. And there's also the concept of your phone almost working as a third party to your marriage, where
that's the piece I think is most dangerous. Is you're describing some of the more nefarious, dark features of things, but the reality is if you and I are married to each other and I'm sitting here and I'm doing this, and you say, what are you up to, darling? And I go, oh, I'm just looking at the menu of that restaurant we're going to this weekend with our friends. And meanwhile, I'm messaging my girlfriend, or I'm on OnlyFans, or I'm looking, like, there's no way for you to know what I'm doing on this phone. So I think it's made it very, and by the way, just by definition, the number of people you and I both see every day next to each other, but completely disconnected from each other because they're both on this little box, this little device, and not paying any attention to each other. The cliche of the couple sitting there both in front of the TV and then they both have their phones. So it's like we're looking at this box when we're not looking at this box, and we're certainly not engaging each other. And again, I'm not saying that to be critical of people. Like, kids got to sleep, and being like, hey, I want to see what's going on in the world by using my phone and looking at the news, or I want to see, what emails did I miss at work so that I don't have as much stress the next day, and or I want to just watch this silly show, and distract myself from the stresses of day-to-day life. I get it. I completely get it. But I also know, discipline. Jocko Willenick said that discipline is defined as trading what you want now for what you want most. And to me, I think we should be disciplined in our marriages, because what I want now, I might want to check my phone. I'm curious. I want to know what's going on with this. I want to know what the weather's going to be tomorrow. There's a million things I want to know that little box has to tell me. There's so many things I'd like to see that I can find in that little box. But what I want most is a deep connection to the people in my life. I want lasting connection. I want a connection that's not dependent on my cell phone provider or my internet provider. Like, I want a connection with another person, who I can love and be loved by. So to me, I think we have to trade what we want right now. Like, I think the phones are chocolate cake, and who doesn't like chocolate cake, But if you have chocolate cake 3-4 meals a day, like, that phone and these apps and all of these social media services, they were designed by people that don't care about you, but they want your money, and that they're junk food of the mind to some degree. And again, there's nothing wrong with junk food once in a while, but if that is the staple of your diet, you're going to die in a real and meaningful way. You're going to die, and I don't think you have to. I think that there is something really beautiful about human connection with another person that, again, as I get older, I come to appreciate even more. I've come to appreciate it more and more as I get older.
So when you're talking about connection, I want to talk about a different kind of divorce, which you often see with people in midlife, which is something we call sleep divorce. I saw a video of this guy, and he was saying that, if a woman loves a man, she will sleep in sync with him. She will adjust her schedule to suit his. But what does that mean for the sleep divorce, for couples who have decided to sleep in not only different beds, but different bedrooms?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would push back that certain things like where a person sleeps may not be an indication of the health of a marriage. I certainly know people who have, if you can get them to be honest with you, very happy marriages, but they're like, oh yeah, one of the reasons we have a happy marriage is that we have separate bedrooms. It doesn't mean we don't have sex. It doesn't mean we don't spend time together, but we both like to sleep. And when we sleep, we like to starfish out in that bed and be comfortable and not hear each other snoring. And, so I think there is value. But I think the question you're really asking about is when people engage in what in children we would call parallel play, which is where like the kids are having a play date, but they're not playing with each other. They're just like in the same room playing different things, playing by themselves, basically. And there are permutations of marriage where people are like, oh yeah, we live very parallel lives. Like there's not a lot, the Venn diagram of he and I and what are our joint activities. That joint activity thing is really quite small, and it involves, we don't sleep in the same room. We don't necessarily sleep together sexually anymore. We don't necessarily travel together. We travel separately with friends, or we travel on our own. Again, the only two people that really are qualified to talk about how healthy a marriage is are the two people who are in it. I don't dare suggest that, that it would be like there's a better or worse way to do it. I think a lot of the people who end up in my office are people who decided or had told to them that there's a formula they're supposed to follow. And this is what marriage is supposed to look like, and this is how you're supposed to do it. And very often that leads people to very unfortunate places, because again, if you love to travel, if I'm married to you and you love to travel, but we have children or we have pets or we have children and pets and require responsibility. Okay. So then if you say, I'm going to go away for a long weekend to Paris. I just want to get away. I want to smell the diesel in the air and the cigarette smoke. And I want to just be somewhere else and just sort of have that experience. And I go, well, why do you get to go away for the week? You know, what? Oh, and I have to be here and I have to take care of all these things now because you get to. Okay, you're right. So we can both be miserable. Let's both stay here and both be miserable. Or you can look at it as, okay, like, yeah, I want you to be happy. I want you to be well. If that's going to feed you and make you come back recharged and ready to sort of, you know, connect deeply to this situation, great. And I would hope, not that it should be a quid pro quo, but I would hope that if I have something like that you'll approach it the same way. Like, I want you to enjoy and I want you to be the fullest version of yourself. Because again, every good marriage, there's the you, there's the me, and there's the we. And if you let the we completely eclipse the you and the me. So when you talk about divorces where essentially people are not as interconnected, well, I don't know that that's necessarily a precursor to divorce. I think sometimes that parallel play leads people to realize, yeah, there's no point in being together anymore. And that's okay if you come to that realization. That may actually be a less fiery end to a marriage. Like, it's ending with a whimper rather than a bang. You sort of go, we're kind of used to living our lives separate from each other, and that's okay, you know? But I actually find that a thing that frequently happens in gray divorce is when someone retires and suddenly the other person goes, look, I said for better or for worse. I didn't say for lunch. Like, I am not used to having you here all the time. And I like having my life and my autonomy. And like, I've had women come in and say to me, like, yeah, he's in my house all the time now. And I'm like, you mean your house, you and his house? She's like, yes, but he used to like come home, sleep, get up in the morning, leave, and on the weekends we'd be around or whatever. But like, now he's just here all the time, you know? And you know, I can certainly understand that.
Yeah, and I think there's also a stigma to it, right? People on the outside looking into your marriage where you're like, oh, he's in the other room. What's happening? Like, are you okay? Or for instance, my husband and my son just went on a European vacation to Germany together. And I had so many people stop me and say, well, what, you're not going? And I'm like, no.
You know, and what's so funny to me is I see that and I think to myself, what a wonderful experience they're having. And what a wonderful experience you must be having to like, oh, they're out of the house. I can kind of like do things the way I want to, eat at the time I want to, sleep at the time. Like this is great. I can spread out. And then when everyone returns, they have so much appreciation for each other. So yeah, look, I think the great epics of misery in our lives is when we look at, well, how am I supposed to be doing this? How would the crowd like me to be doing this? Because, you know, if you want to conduct the symphony, you got to turn your back to the audience. And I genuinely think there is like very little value in saying like, well, what's this going to look like to other people? It does. Who cares? First of all, why should anyone be told where you're sleeping and what room you're sleeping in? What business is it of theirs? And second of all, what the hell does that tell you about their marriage? You know how many people are sleeping in the same bed and hate each other? You know, whenever somebody said like, oh, you don't sleep in the same room. It's like, yeah, what sleeping? When somebody says, oh, he slept with her, I'm like, well, I don't think the problem was that he slept with her. I think the problem was they had sex with each other. Like the sleeping would be fine. Like if you want to sleep with someone, go right ahead. I don't know about you, but I don't tend to get in trouble when I'm asleep. You know, it's the being in bed with a person awake that's kind of causes some issues. So I think that the less we allow ourselves to be obsessed, but again, in this performative social media society where everybody's showing us their like, you know, imagined perfect dream life that they're putting out in front of us, and we're comparing our gag reel that we're living with the greatest hits that this person is putting up for performance sake. Yeah, of course, we're all going to fall short of that. They fall short of that in real life.
So there was like a Canadian celebrity or celebrity type who just did a podcast, and I think she's in her 50s, and she just quietly said, you know what, my husband and I quietly separated. Nobody knew about it. There wasn't any fighting. It wasn't volatile. So how do you know when you're in midlife, when it's just time to pull the plug on the marriage? And, you know, I'm not talking an abusive or volatile marriage, but maybe one that just doesn't make sense anymore because you're just two different people.
Yeah. Yeah, I get this question a lot because people come in and they have a consultation with me and they say, I'm not happy. And sometimes I'll say to them, well, you know, not to put on a therapist hat, but I'll say to them, well, what does that necessarily have to do with your marriage? Because, you may be unhappy with yourself, with the choices you're making. It may not have a lot to do with your marriage. Because if you're looking to your marriage to make you happy, that may in and of itself be a problem, right? Like your marriage, looking at another person and saying it's this person's job to make me happy, that's kind of problematic. So, but I certainly think that people frequently look at their partner and say, we're not fighting. No one's throwing lamps at each other. Like we're not sick, but we're not vibrantly healthy, right? Like, and that's a really hard place to be, where it's like, I'm not sad, but I'm not happy. I'm just kind of nothing, And I would say that the opposite of love isn't hate, right? Hate and love are both very powerful emotions. The opposite of love is indifference. So saying, yeah, this person doesn't make me feel anything. Like I don't hate them. I don't love them. When I see them, I'm not upset that I'm seeing them, but I also am not happy. I feel no joy that I'm seeing them. That's a really hard place to be, because when you tell people, because again, everything's for the audience. When we tell people, yeah, we're breaking up, and they go, why? You kind of hope you have because he's sleeping with his secretary, or because I caught her with her personal trainer, or because he bet all of our money in crypto and it went to nothing. And when it just goes, yeah, I don't know. We just, we lost the plot. We lost the plot of the story we were trying to write together, and then we couldn't find our way home. We just, so much distance built between us that by the time we saw it, we were so far from shore that it was like, I don't know that I can get back there. Because look, we all know, it's a lot easier to maintain a healthy weight than it is to gain a ton of weight and then try to lose the weight, right? It's easier to, again, it's easier to see the dentist when you don't have the toothache. But I understand that, that's a really hard thing to be unhappy and unfulfilled in your relationship, but not be able to point to something and say, yeah, I've got to end this thing, because then it's up to you. It's up to you. You're a grown up and you have to go, okay, is this bad enough that I'm going to blow up certain aspects of my life? But what I will say in 25 years of being a divorce lawyer is the manner in which we overstate the destructive force of divorce as a culture is fairly significant. I mean, we're talking about 56% of marriages roughly end in divorce. So that puts you in the majority, first of all. And second of all, you hear about really ugly, terrible divorces because A, they're so much more interesting. And B, the kinds of people who have those divorces are the kinds of people that talk a lot about their divorce. I'm divorced. I got divorced 17 years ago. It's the least interesting story. College sweethearts, drifted apart in some ways, both love our children so much, very friendly, divided our assets, had a wonderful co-parenting relationship for the last 17 years. She remarried to a wonderful guy who's nothing like me personality-wise, but is perfect for her, and we all get along fantastic. Not a really interesting story. If I was at a cocktail party and somebody said, what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a divorce lawyer. And they said, oh my God, you must have some stories. If I told them that story, they would be like, that is a really boring story. They want to hear the one about, and then he took a chainsaw and he cut the car in half and he said, you can pick which half you want. That, true story, by the way. That's the story that people want to hear. And so that's how people in this sort of popular zeitgeist, they think that's what divorce looks like. When in fact, what divorce really most of the time is two people who just drifted apart from each other. But the world doesn't have a lot of sympathy for that. When you say yeah, this is so painful, I'm ending this thing. And they go, why? And you go, we've just grown apart, but it's really sad. It makes me sad. Then people go, well, it can't make you that sad. Then get back together with the person if it makes you that sad. But the truth is no, it's okay to be sad and to know that something has run its course if it has. It doesn't have to be that it ends in flames. It can be that it just is, we tried. If sheer power of will could make each other love each other forever and live happily ever after, I'm sure we would do it. But we don't have the ingredients to make that thing. So if we don't have those ingredients, when's the time? And I think midlife is a time I found for myself where you start to realize no one's going to tell you when it's time. Like, when should I retire? When should I cut back? No one's going to tell you. Like, there's no Superman coming. There's no like siren that's going to sound that you go, oh, that's the time. I got to retire now. Like, you start to go, well, no, wait, when? Who's going to tell me? You know, and the person who purports to tell me, do they have an agenda? You know, or is it someone I can genuinely trust? And how much should I trust myself and my own gut and my own feelings, right? So, you know, I think the divorce that ends with the whimper, not the bang, I feel much worse for people in that situation to some degree, because it takes a tremendous amount of courage and conviction in your like your faith in yourself and your faith in your own compass. And I think that's an admirable trait for people to have.
Yeah. And lastly, because I know you have to go.
Yeah.
If there was any signs, or maybe one sign you could tell husbands to look out for, or wives to look out for, to know that their marriage is in trouble. Because I'll tell you, from a woman's point of view, you know, you say the opposite of love is indifference. It's not hate. And it's true, because if a woman still loves you, she's yelling at you. She could be throwing things at you, but she's, you know, she's shaking you. Hear me. Once she goes silent, done.
Yeah. You know, what I would say is this, is the encouragement I often give people in this, answering this question, is to look at the little things that your partner has done in the past for you that made you feel loved. Because there's a lot of little things our partners do or have done, very often it's in the past tense, that made us feel loved. And it can be, there's an example I give in my book of granola. That there was a woman who, I said to her, when did you know your marriage was over? And she said, there was this type of granola that I like to put in my yogurt for breakfast. And my husband always bought it for me. She's like, and any time it was starting to run out in the bag, there would just be a new bag magically appeared. They only sold it at this one grocery store. And like, she just said, like, I never said it out loud to him, but like, it always made me feel loved, like, and seen. And it wasn't even something that he did, like, oh, I got you your granola, like he wanted thanks or praise for it. It was just this little thing he did that was like, oh, I noticed you're running out of your granola, and I know you like to have it for breakfast, so I'm gonna. And he didn't say any of that out loud. He just did it. And one day the granola ran out, and she thought, well, you know, he's been busy, and maybe it's just something he wasn't, you know. So she left the empty bag there, though, thinking like, oh, he'll eventually realize. And then he didn't. And she said she remembered, oh, this thing might be like on its way out. And sure enough, there was a sort of straight line, you know, to that. And so I think, as silly as it sounds, like, what's your granola? You know, like, do we all have a granola? You know, was it that you when your spouse was leaving in the morning, you stopped and gave him a hug or a kiss, or you made sure you guys had a quickie in the morning before, you know, someone was leaving for a trip, or whatever it might be. Like, we all have some little thing. We bring in the paper, you know, that's at the bottom of the driveway. We take out the bins. Like, it might be some little stupid, meaningless, unromantic thing. But it's just a way we tell our partner, like, hey, you're here. I see you. I want you to be happy. I want you to be comfortable. I want to do things for you that show you that you're important to me. And I think that's what we all have to be, because it's so easy to stop seeing that stuff. And meanwhile, I think that's everything. Like, that's everything. That is the foundational elements of love. It's the core.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, everybody just wants to feel like they're important, right? Like they matter.
Yeah, they're important. They're valued. They're loved. They have someone who's looking out for them, cheering for them. And I think at the end of the day, most of us not only want that, but we want our partner to feel that. Like, we want our partner. We want to be the source of that for our partner. Like, we want our partner, when they think of us, to think, oh, that's my shelter in the storm. Like, that's the person who's, they've got my back. They're looking out for me. And ask yourself that question. Like, not, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Like, rather than follow the trend that's very popular of like picking apart all the things your spouse is doing wrong or could be doing better, be brave enough to say, like, hey, what what could I do better? Or what am I doing that I'm doing well in this relationship? And when is the last time I let my partner know when they got it right? You know, when they did something right. When's the last time I rewarded that by saying like, man, that was so cool when you did that. Like, that makes me so happy when you did that, you know? And when's the last time, if they're falling short, that with love, I was able to express to them like, oh, I miss when you used to da 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 da. Oh, I was thinking the other day about when you used to da 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 da, and it made me smile because I loved when you do that. And at least that gives them a chance to go, oh, yeah, I guess I haven't done that in a while, you know, and maybe a chance to do it again, or to explain to you why they haven't been doing it, but not in an attacking way, in a defensive way, and like, oh, wow, yeah, I didn't, you know. So I just think, again, we got to feed these things. Like, we have to feed. Like, you didn't mean to kill the plant, but you killed the plant because you didn't water the plant. Like, you got to water the plant, gang. You got to water the plant.
We all got to water the plants. Thank
That's
you, James, for taking the time to speak.
Such a pleasure.
It was an honor to speak to you. And
I appreciate you inviting me. It was great to be here. And I really think best of luck with all of it, because I think this is a really, maybe it's selfishly because I'm a person who's in later middle life, but I think it's a really great thing to bring some focus to that stage in life, because I think it's more and more important. So
yeah. Well, thanks so much. I know you're a busy guy.
all the
I really
best.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Take care. Be well.
Bye-bye.